Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Crafty Saucer. My name is Denise Pereira and I'm the host of Crafty Saucer and the founder of Collider Source. On this podcast, we talk about tax strategy tools and now we've also added stories. But today we're doing something different. We're actually going to be diving into recruitment stories, a topic that's actually quite close to my heart. I'd like to shine a spotlight on our LGBTQIA community within the recruitment industry, right? Today we've got James Brennan on the show today, and we're going to talk about how coming out at work, being ourselves at work, how did it help us grow or did it hold us back? So, James, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's actually my podcast debut, so I'm very excited.
Well, we've popped the podcast cherry here, right, on Collider Source. So thanks so much for being here, James. James, before we get into it, right, first of all, I am very, very appreciative of your time, but also the fact that I'd like to just iterate that this is absolutely a safe space for you to, be yourself. And I'm so glad that you're here and open to sharing your story. So for those who may not know who you are, take it away. Tell us.
So, yeah, I mean, my name's James. I work for a company called Halcyon Knights. We're a tech recruitment agency. I've been with them now for about 6 or 7 months, specializing in all things go to market. So, specifically hiring sales teams from your entry level roles to more senior director level roles as well. Outside of that, I guess a little bit about myself. Originally from the UK, I've been in Australia now for about 6.5 years. I came out to my close friends when I was about, I think, 19 or 20. And that was actually whilst I was at university. I'd been in a closeted relationship actually for about 10 months. And then when that fell apart, I kind of was in a situation where I was dealing with a breakup and then also dealing with the fact that I was gay and I hadn't told anyone. So was really trying to figure out how to accept that and also be able to share it with people. So started to tell people when I was about 19 or 20. And I think then over time, I told my mum just before I left for Australia, and then also told my dad once I'd left. But part of the reason I think that I'd actually moved on from the UK to Australia was to have a bit of a fresh start and move somewhere when there's no preconceptions, and I can just live as I want to be with, out any judgment and stuff like that.
There's a beauty, like you said, about moving somewhere else, starting fresh. It's funny how we always associate starting fresh with moving somewhere, right? Like I moved from
Really?
Pakistan to Australia, but there is a beauty in that, going to an unknown place, no familiar faces, no familiar names. You just go out, be yourself, do your thing, and there's no judgment. And I know coming out is really, really hard in general, and everybody's journey looks very, very different. And I hope that you did get the support when you were coming out. I came out very, very late in life. I still struggle sometimes as well to come out. And growing up in Pakistan, you tend to put on a mask, based on who you're actually communicating with and who has the appetite to embrace who you are versus you're just not. So it's very hard because you've got to play all these dual different roles that you're not used to, but then you become accustomed to it over time as well. So James, obviously when you moved over here, what was your journey into coming out into a workplace? And why I ask this question is there's obviously a lot of difference between optics and action. We've seen it on every careers website, to a point where the intent is always good by a company, but I also feel like we also use it for buzzwords to just make sure that we are doing the right thing or we seem like we're doing the right thing by everyone, right? So your journey into being who you want to be at a workplace, what has that looked like for you?
It's a good question. Look, I think, Denise, to be honest, I had to, before I started coming or sharing my story with people at work and coming out to colleagues and stuff like that, I had to get myself to a position in myself where I was fully accepting who I was and, I was proud of the fact that I was gay. And I think whilst I was almost there when I moved to Australia, if I reflect now on where I'm at the moment to where I was when I first moved, I probably wasn't quite ready to have those conversations. And, I think that probably comes down to fear of being judged, not accepted, treated differently, all of the things that, as LGBT plus people growing up is typically what we experience, whether that be at school or, with friends or peers, stuff like that. So once I eventually got myself to a point where I was comfortable to share that with people, there isn't a pinnacle moment where there was this big grand gesture where I came out to everyone and everyone screamed and said, "Hooray, thanks for sharing." But look, I think over time I was able to just gain the confidence to have conversations with closer colleagues at work.
You said something very interesting. You said for you to be fully able to come out, you said you need to feel proud of yourself.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I get exactly what you're saying, but I'd love to hear from your end as well. Like, tell me a little about that.
Of course, yeah. So look, I think a lot of the time growing up, at least if I speak from my own experience, there was a lot of shame, there was a lot of guilt, there was lots of denial, all these like negative emotions that kind of just consume you from growing up all the way up until I was probably in my late teens to early 20s. And it got to the point where I had to, like, once I'd kind of fully accepted who I was, I was able to just live unapologetically, really. That's from support from peers and speaking to friends and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's just a process, like, over time. That's yeah, it's not an overnight thing.
100%. And when you said that, it kind of just took me back to myself as well. And you're right, there's so many mixed emotions because it's that whole layer of tabooness, if that's even a word. Like, like, if I'm saying something or if I'm being able to be myself, is someone going to take it the wrong way? You're right, the first thing is shame, guilt, denial. There's so many different emotions and feelings attached to who we are. But I also feel like, it's also depends on the people that we surround ourselves with that can really amplify our voices in being able to be who we are. And why I say that is, from if I look at my story, when I came to Australia, I struggled big time because I have a thing with trust. I have to have a lot of trust in someone to be able to peel back the layers and show a little bit of myself here and there. I always feel like everyone gets to see a side of me that I am happy to show everyone and anyone. But there's
Mhm.
also a side to me that I feel like, okay, I'm only going to show it to certain people because I know they have the appetite. They're a lot more open. They're a lot more embracing of, the different sort of random sides to myself that I have. From a workplace perspective, how has that sort of helped you to, fully be comfortable in your own skin, be who you are? Maybe I know, James, you and I spoke about a time where you also felt like you haven't been able to be like that as well. So do you want to shed a light on some of that, please?
Sure. So, look, I think being gay has, and my journey up until this point has probably it's helped and hindered who I am at the same time for different reasons. One of the things, particularly in the workplace, and if I speak about recruitment specifically, you need to be incredibly resilient in recruitment, especially when you're sitting on the agency side of things. There's lots of variables that are outside of your control. Often things don't go as planned and stuff like that. I absolutely, hands down, can say that, if because of my experience up until this point, and the uncertainty that I've experienced, bullying, all that kind of stuff growing up, has made me an incredibly resilient person. And I think even the fact that we have to have those conversations, the fact that we have to come out in itself, that takes a lot out of people. I'd say that's definitely one thing. Resilience has been like a definitely thing that something that I've taken with me from my journey. And this is kind of going back to what you just said a second ago, Denise. But whilst I'm in a much better place than what I was, and I am proud of who I am. There is still part of me that filters myself around certain people, whether that be colleagues or not necessarily in my job right now, but just in generally speaking. Or on the flip side, going to meetings outside of work with external stakeholders. Something that I've had a challenge with in recruitment is my own, not biases, if you will, but just preconceptions of people based on experiences that I've had when I was a lot younger. So I'll use an example of, when I was at school, perhaps I was bullied by a group of boys at school for being gay, even though I wasn't openly gay at the time, that I was picked on for that reason. If I reflect on that now, I've taken that trauma with me through to my adult life. And I find sometimes if I'm going to meet with a straight white male for a meeting, and it's a client or something like that, or a prospective client or a candidate, whilst I've never experienced any issues with anyone that I've met with and everyone's been lovely, internally I definitely have anxiety, and I'm scared. Sometimes I'm scared to go into those conversations, and I reel myself in and I filter out certain parts of me because I don't want to necessarily give away that I'm gay or anything like that, because I for fear of being judged or maybe looked at differently. So that's probably something that's hindered me, and something that I'm actively working on. I think over time, the more people that I've met with, and not like no one has treated me any differently, it is slowly improving. But yeah, that would probably be the two things that I would say so far.
Thanks for sharing that, James, because I imagine it wouldn't be easy to talk about it either. Because I think a lot of the time, sometimes we are in our own heads a lot because of our past sort of trauma, and we bring it into our life, and it has to happen, because for us to sometimes get to the next stage and kind of work our way forward from there, we have to bring it with us. Otherwise it doesn't make sense for us to move on from there, if that makes sense. Like, I've struggled too, I know, again, and I go back to early when I first came to Australia, was because I was an immigrant. I spoke differently. My accent was slightly different. And I felt like I had a lot more to prove than people that were already here. And when I say a lot more to prove, was not just from a work perspective, but also my own individuality, because I've come from a place where I had to be someone else to now in a country where I could absolutely be myself, but I didn't know how to,
Yep.
and that itself, like, you're right. Sometimes we already have these preconceived notions that if I'm going to show a little of myself, is someone going to accept that, or are we going to be judged based on who we are? And this is where we sometimes create barriers for ourselves because we're overthinking a lot of that at the
Yep.
same time.
And
How do you think? Sorry, James, go on.
I was just going to say, so just as you were talking there, Denise, something came to mind, and it was around the idea of perfectionism, which I think that comes from, and something that I deal with. I feel like I need to be perfect at everything, which often is detrimental because I'm focusing very tunnel vision rather than looking at the bigger picture and having some big, wider perspective, which might mean that it takes me twice as long to complete a task or twice as long to make the call because I'm worried about what to say or what not to say. So when you were saying that, it definitely, it triggered something else for me that has definitely, yeah, I guess hindered a little bit how I approach work.
And I think it's also the fact that because of us not feeling like we can be ourselves, and we feel uncomfortable where we should be feeling comfortable, that means we have to tiptoe around a lot of the things that we are saying, how we look, how we speak, all of that. And one thing I know that's helped me professionally is the people that who are true allies, people who have shown up when I didn't want to show up for myself. And one small example is my ex boss that I used to work with. They obviously knew I was gay. I never explicitly said it, so it was an assumption on their part, right? And I remember we were standing at the tram stop on Berg Street, and she said to me, she was like, "So how long have you been with your partner for?" And I was like, "That's odd." I was like, "I've never actually said anything," and that just opened the gateways for me to just be myself. And I just started talking about everything and anything, became pretty good friends, and she was my manager. But the reality is that people need to make you feel comfortable to be able to do that. If that person had come from a place of, are you exploiting information out of me because, you know um, I don't know if you actually mean well or you don't mean well. And this is the thing we also question a lot, is someone's intent behind what they want to get out of us at the same time. Again, it's a lot of stuff that's in our head, but it's not just there for the sake of being there. It's stuff that we've actually been through, in the workplace. And I'm sure, there are people that have made us feel uncomfortable, but I also feel like there are a lot more people out there that have done, not, I wouldn't say right by us, but just been treated us like we're humans, if that makes sense. James, what would you say to those that are probably in a very similar situation to what we've been in, in terms of not about just coming out, but just being able to take one thing at a time? Like you said, and I agree with you 100%, we don't have to be shouting it from the rooftops. We don't have to be, banging down doors and saying, hey, we're gay. But it's also the reality is that we don't have to constantly keep saying it. It needs to be understood that we're just humans at the end of the day, and we just want to feel like we belong somewhere, whether that's in a workplace, whether that's in a social setting, wherever that is. But what would you say to someone who's in that position now, who are struggling to be themselves? What would you say to them, especially at work?
Yep. Look, it's a tough question. I think, I would like to think that most people at work have at least one person, whether that's a colleague, a member of management, someone in HR, that they feel comfortable enough to speak to and have that conversation. I think it sounds cliche, but a problem shared is a problem halved. A problem shared is a problem halved. So I think speaking to someone that you trust is probably the first step in feeling like you are accepted, belong, all of those good feelings that everyone should have whilst they're at work. And then I think over time, doing what you can to actually be that advocate, and that doesn't come overnight, right? It's a process that takes time. If once you've got yourself to a point where you are able to speak openly about who you are and feel like it's a safe space, having the courage to actually start those conversations as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an excellent start, because fine, I think you also have to be so comfortable with someone to be that. Like, I've been around people that try to make you overly comfortable, and
Mm.
it doesn't just sit well with you, because you're like, I don't know what the intent is behind this conversation here. But I think, we've all everyone's journey is so different to each other's, but I think we all share one common thing, is that if we can find a support system, because at the end of the day, if I look at why I'm here today and doing what I'm doing in my personal life and my professional life, it's there because I've had the support,
Mhm.
in my personal life and in my professional life. Because if you don't have that, it's very, very hard to get from one day to the next as well. James, is there anything else that you'd like to share, before we kind of close off this conversation?
Um, there isn't anything specific that I would like to share, but one thing I would say is, and Denise, if you haven't read this book, I would absolutely recommend that you read it. It's called The Velvet Rage. I
Okay.
forget who the author is, but I actually read it probably about 6 months ago, and it was like reading my own personal diary from when I was a child, with all these feelings and not knowing how to deal with them, going through to adult life, and it gives you tips on how to deal with how you're feeling, have those conversations. And I think more than anything, it just made me feel seen. So if anyone's listening and, is maybe struggling to accept who they are, or even, you're in a place where you're happy with your sexuality, you're comfortable with your sexuality, I'd still read it because it was really quite an amazing read.
I'm definitely going to take the name of that book from you after this as well, because if you think about like 10, 15 years ago, James, I know when I was a teenager and I was kind of trying to find my way, my identity, we didn't have the resources that we do now,
Mm.
right? We didn't have the support that we have now. So, in some shape or form, there's a lot more for us to clutch on to look forward to, versus back in the day. I'm not saying that it's any easier than it was, but we are in 2020. There's a lot more things available to us from a reading perspective, support groups, you have employee communities. There's so many different things that companies are also doing to, there are companies that are doing the right thing. And like we know, in the US last year, when they were talking about all the DEIB stuff being taken away, there was a lot of people that were worried about what does that mean for them individually, what does that mean for them to be able to show up and be who they are. Because now you're like, hey, I've come this far, I'm happy being open, and now all of a sudden I don't know what my company's policies are on this, and I don't know if I need to backtrack a little bit. But I definitely am going to take the name of that book from you, because there's a friend of mine that definitely needs some of that. So, James, thank you for sharing some of your story so openly. I'm sure that your words are going to stick with a lot of us who are going to be listening. And we've all been in rooms where we've either been we've felt like we've been seen, or we've felt like we've been a bit invisible as well. So thank you so much. And to whoever is listening or will be listening to this, if you ever question whether you belong, whether that's in a team, whether it's in technology, whether it's in recruitment, whether it's in any room, I hope that James's story and some of the stuff that we've talked about reminds you that you absolutely belong, whether wherever that is. And if you are in a position to create that belonging for someone else, I'd highly say don't wait for Pride Month to do it. We have a chance to make a difference in someone's life pretty much every day. So James, once again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And for everybody else, stay crafty. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise.